Dr. Nathan Wells takes in a lost little girl, Emma, and they quickly form a deep bond. But when Emma's biological mother resurfaces, a custody battle threatens to tear them apart. Can Nathan protect the new family they've built? Or will he lose the daughter he's come to love? Comment your thoughts and predictions below, and subscribe for more emotional stories of love, hope, and second chances. Dr. Nathan Wells dragged his feet as he made his way home from the hospital, his body heavy with exhaustion. The late evening sun cast long shadows along the quiet streets of Maplewood, the suburban neighborhood where he lived. The trees, their leaves turning a crisp golden brown in the late autumn chill, rustled softly as the breeze picked up. It was peaceful here, the kind of peace most people longed for at the end of a long day. But for Nathan, peace had become synonymous with loneliness. His shift at the hospital had been grueling, as they always were. Pediatrics was a field that brought him joy once, but lately it had become more of a refuge. He threw himself into his work, losing himself in the care of sick children, if only to drown out the deafening silence of his empty home. It wasn't that he didn't love what he did. He was one of the best pediatricians in the state. But his work had become more of an escape than a calling. As he walked, his eyes drifted toward the houses that lined his route. Warm light spilled through windows, illuminating cozy living rooms where families gathered for dinner or sat around the television. He could hear the faint sound of laughter from a house nearby, probably a child telling a silly story, with parents smiling as they listened. The warmth from these homes seemed to mock the cold that had settled in Nathan's chest. Nathan's home was at the end of the street, a modest two-story house with a wraparound porch that he and his wife Sarah had bought shortly after their wedding. They had spent hours discussing the future they would build together in that house. It was going to be filled with laughter, children's drawings on the fridge, and the chaos that came with a growing family. But that dream had shattered when Sarah's cancer diagnosis came out of nowhere. She was gone before they could even talk about adoption, before they could make the family they had both longed for. Nathan stopped for a moment, just before reaching his house, his eyes resting on the porch swing where they used to sit and talk about their future. The ache in his chest was constant, like a dull, unrelenting pain, and though years had passed since Sarah's death, the weight of her absence had never lifted. He stood there for a moment, watching the swing creak softly in the breeze. It was the same porch swing where Sarah had told him she wanted to be a mother more than anything in the world. Nathan had wanted that too, but now that dream seemed like a distant echo from another life. His thoughts were interrupted by the faintest sound, a soft cry that barely broke through the stillness of the night. Nathan turned, his brow furrowing. It was almost indistinguishable, something that could have easily been mistaken for the wind. But there was something about it that tugged at him. His instincts, honed from years as a doctor, sharpened. He stood still, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, muffled sob. Nathan's heart began to pound in his chest as he followed the sound, walking toward a narrow alley between two buildings across the street. It was an alley he had passed hundreds of times, but never paid attention to. As he approached, the faint crying grew louder, more distinct. He moved cautiously, unsure of what he would find. The alley was dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp, casting long shadows against the brick walls. His pulse quickened as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. At the far end of the alley, huddled against a cold brick wall, was a small figure. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. It was a child, no more than 6 or 7, curled into herself with her knees drawn up to her chest. Her clothes were ragged and far too thin for the cold evening air. Her skin, dark and dirt-streaked, gleamed faintly in the weak light. She was trembling. "Hey," Nathan called softly, his voice gentle, trying not to startle her. "Are you okay?" The girl's head snapped up at the sound of his voice. Her wide, fearful eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if trying to make herself invisible. Nathan's heart twisted at the sight. She was terrified, more scared than any child should ever be. "It's okay," he said, raising his hands slowly in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm Dr. Wells. I work at the hospital nearby." The girl didn't respond. She just stared at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Nathan took a slow step toward her, keeping his movements deliberate and gentle. He could see her trembling, not just from fear but from the cold. Her small frame was too frail to endure much longer out here. His mind raced, searching for the right words to calm her down, but nothing seemed adequate. "Do you speak English?" he asked, his tone calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The girl said something, but the words were foreign, garbled in her panic. It wasn't English, that much was clear. Nathan's stomach sank. This just got more complicated. What should he do? Take her to the police station, to the hospital? He was torn, but the sight of her, small and alone in the dark, pushed him to make a decision. He couldn't leave her here. "It's okay," he repeated, crouching down to her level, his voice soft. "You don't have to be afraid. Come with me, and I'll take you somewhere safe." He extended his hand toward her, offering her a lifeline. The girl hesitated, her gaze flickering between his face and his hand. She was clearly debating whether or not to trust him. Nathan waited, his breath caught in his throat. The silence stretched on, the only sound the distant hum of the wind and the soft rustling of leaves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the girl reached out and placed her small, trembling hand in his. Relief washed over Nathan as he gently helped her to her feet. She was light, too light, and he wondered how long she had been out here alone. He kept his voice calm as he spoke to her, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. "It's not far," he said, leading her toward his house. "We'll get you inside, warmed up, and figure this out." The girl didn't respond, but she followed him quietly, her small hand gripping his tightly as if he were her only anchor to the world. The warmth of the house enveloped them as Nathan led the girl inside, gently closing the door behind them. The living room was softly lit by a single lamp, casting a golden glow over the polished hardwood floors. Nathan stood still for a moment, watching as the girl took in her surroundings. Her wide eyes flicked from the furniture to the walls as if she couldn't quite believe she was safe. "You're okay now," Nathan said gently, though he knew the words were more for his benefit than hers. The girl still hadn't spoken a word he could understand, and her silence hung in the air like a barrier between them. He walked into the kitchen, pulling open the fridge to search for something he could give her to eat. As he worked, his mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why wasn't anyone looking for her? He had so many questions, but right now the most important thing was making sure she was warm and fed. "Are you hungry?" he asked, turning to face her. He mimed eating, hoping she would understand. The girl hesitated, her brow furrowing as she watched him, but after a moment, she nodded slowly. Nathan sighed with relief and quickly set about making something simple. A bowl of soup, some bread, and a glass of milk. He placed the food on the table and gestured for her to sit. She sat down cautiously, her eyes darting from the food to Nathan as if she were waiting for permission. Nathan gave her an encouraging nod. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Eat." The girl's hands shook as she picked up the spoon, and for a moment she just stared at the soup. Then, as if she were afraid it might be taken away, she began eating with a desperation that made Nathan's heart ache. She shoveled the food into her mouth so quickly that he worried she might choke. "Slow down," Nathan said gently, reaching out to stop her. "It's okay, there's plenty." She looked up at him, startled, but nodded and slowed her pace. Nathan sat across from her, watching as she ate in silence. She was so small, so fragile. The thought of her being out on the streets alone, in this condition, made his stomach turn. He had seen neglected children before, malnourished, abandoned, scared, but there was something about this girl that made it impossible for him to look away. When she finished, Nathan stood up and walked toward the small hallway that led to the bathroom. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand him. He gestured for her to follow, and after a moment's hesitation, she did. The bathroom was small but cozy, with soft towels hanging on the rack and a basket of Sarah's old soaps and shampoos still sitting on the counter. Nathan filled the sink with warm water, grabbing a washcloth and showing the girl how to wash her face and hands. She mimicked his actions, scrubbing at the dirt that had collected on her skin. "You're doing great," Nathan said, though the girl remained silent. As she washed, he noticed how thin her arms were, her skin pulled tight over delicate bones. She had been through more than he could possibly imagine. After she was clean, Nathan pulled a large t-shirt from his drawer and handed it to her. "It's not much, but it'll be more comfortable than what you're wearing." The girl took the shirt and disappeared into the bathroom to change. When she emerged, the oversized shirt hung down to her knees, making her look even smaller than she already was. Nathan felt a pang in his chest as he watched her stand there, unsure of what to do next. "You can sleep in here," Nathan said, gesturing to the guest room. He pulled back the covers on the bed, hoping it would make her feel more comfortable. The girl stood in the doorway for a moment, her eyes wide and uncertain, but eventually she stepped inside, climbing into the bed. Nathan tucked the blankets around her, feeling an unexpected wave of protectiveness washed over him. "You're safe now," he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I promise." As he turned to leave, he felt a small hand grab his. He looked down to see the girl staring up at him, her eyes filled with fear of being left alone. Nathan's heart broke at the sight. Without a word, he sat back down, holding her hand until she fell asleep. Nathan barely slept that night. He sat in the living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the quiet house. His mind raced with thoughts of the girl sleeping in the next room. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what on earth was he supposed to do next? He had planned to call the police or social services right away. But now that she was here, warm and safe, he hesitated. What if they took her away? What if she ended up in some overcrowded foster home, lost in the system? The thought made his stomach churn. By morning, Nathan had made up his mind. He wasn't going to hand her over to strangers. Not yet, at least. He would figure out what to do, but for now, he would keep her safe. When the girl finally woke up, she padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Nathan smiled as he set a plate of pancakes on the table. "Good morning," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded, climbing into the chair and staring at the food with wide eyes. She ate slowly this time, savoring each bite as if she weren't sure when she would get her next meal. Nathan watched her, his heart aching. She had been through so much already, and she was only a child. After breakfast, Nathan dialed the number for social services, his stomach twisting with anxiety. He wasn't ready to let her go, but he knew he had to get help. This wasn't something he could handle alone. A kind-voiced social worker named Karen Marshall answered his call, and Nathan quickly explained the situation. "I see," Karen said thoughtfully. "This is certainly an unusual case. Can you bring her to our office today? We'll need to start the process of identifying her and looking for any family." Nathan glanced over at the girl, who was quietly drawing at the kitchen table. The thought of taking her to some sterile government office made her chest tighten. He didn't want to overwhelm her any more than she already was. "I'll bring her in," Nathan said, though his heart sank at the thought. After he hung up, Nathan knelt down beside the girl, who was watching him with those big, sad eyes. "We need to go see some people who might be able to help us find out where you came from," he said gently, though he wasn't sure how much she understood. The girl's lower lip trembled, and she shook her head, her small fists clenching at the edge of the table. Nathan's heart broke a little. "I know it's scary," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I promise I'll be with you the whole time." The girl hesitated for a long moment, then nodded slowly, though her fear was still evident in her eyes. Nathan gave her a reassuring smile and helped her get ready for the day ahead. The social services office was a stark contrast to the cozy warmth of Nathan's home. The waiting room was sterile, brightly lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Nathan sat stiffly in a plastic chair, his knee bouncing with nervous energy as he glanced over at the girl sitting beside him. She clung to his arm, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Karen Marshall, the social worker who had taken Nathan's call, greeted them warmly when they were finally called into her office. She smiled kindly at the girl, though the child remained silent, hiding behind Nathan's legs. "It's okay," Nathan reassured her, though the girl didn't seem convinced. As they sat down, Karen explained the process. "We'll do our best to trace her origins," she said, her tone sympathetic. "But without any identifying information, it could be difficult. There are no current missing persons reports matching her description, which means she could be from out of state." Nathan's stomach sank. "What happens now?" "For now, if you're willing," Karen said gently, "we can start the process of making you her temporary foster parent. It would give her stability while we continue our search." Nathan glanced down at the girl who was clinging to his hand with a grip so tight it nearly hurt. The thought of her being sent to another home, another strange place, made his heart ache. He had only known her for a short time, but the bond he felt toward her was already strong. He couldn't imagine letting her go. "Yes," Nathan said, his voice firm. "I'd like that very much." The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment for both Nathan and the girl. He had begun calling her Emma, though she never corrected him or offered a name of her own. The name seemed to fit, and over time she began responding to it. The language barrier was still a challenge, but they found ways to communicate, mostly through gestures and the occasional broken phrase. Each day, Nathan discovered something new about Emma. She was quiet, observant, and incredibly cautious. Loud noises startled her, and she often woke up in the middle of the night from nightmares. Nathan would sit with her, rubbing her back until she fell asleep again, his heart aching every time he saw the fear in her eyes. He enrolled her in a small school designed for children learning English as a second language. The teachers were kind and patient, but the first few days were difficult. Emma clung to Nathan at drop-off, her eyes wide with fear as he left her in the classroom. She didn't speak much at school, but the teachers assured him that this was normal for children who had experienced trauma. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, Emma pointed to a small bird perched on a nearby fence. "Bird," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathan's heart leapt in his chest. It was the first English word she had spoken since coming to live with him. He smiled down at her, his voice filled with pride. "That's right," he said softly. "It's a bird. A beautiful red one." Emma nodded, a small smile playing on her lips as they continued walking. It was a small victory, but to Nathan, it felt monumental. Slowly but surely, Emma was beginning to open up, to trust him. The days turned into weeks, and Nathan found himself more and more invested in Emma's care. The early morning routine had become second nature, making breakfast, walking Emma to school, and sitting with her during quiet afternoons, where they attempted to communicate more effectively. At first, the language barrier seemed impenetrable, but Emma was learning quickly, adapting with surprising speed. Her progress was heartening, though the walls she had built around herself remained largely intact. Nathan watched her one evening as she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring a picture of a tree with crayons. He had given her an art set as a way to express herself, hoping it might provide an outlet for the things she couldn't yet say. As he stirred a pot of soup on the stove, his gaze lingered on the way she concentrated, her small brow furrowed in thought. "What's this?" he asked, crouching beside her and pointing to the colorful picture she was working on. Emma looked up at him. Her dark eyes were serious. "Tree," she said softly. Nathan smiled. "It's beautiful. Just like the trees we saw at the park today, right?" Emma nodded, and for a moment a flicker of something passed across her face, a glimmer of contentment. But it was fleeting, and her expression quickly returned to its usual guarded state. She was still holding so much back, and Nathan knew there were things she wasn't ready to share yet. He wanted to help her open up, but he didn't know how. Emma's trauma was something he couldn't fully understand, and that made him feel helpless. He had been trained to heal the physical wounds of children, but emotional scars were a different matter entirely. It was then that Nathan decided to reach out to Dr. Joanna Green, a child psychologist who specialized in working with trauma survivors. He had read about her work with displaced children and thought she might be the key to helping Emma unlock the emotions she had buried so deeply. The next morning, Nathan made the call, and within a week they were sitting in Dr. Green's cozy office. Emma clung tightly to Nathan's arm as they sat on the couch, her small body tense with anxiety. The room was decorated with soft colors and toys, designed to be as non-threatening as possible, but it did little to ease Emma's nerves. Dr. Green sat across from them, her kind eyes focused on Emma. She was in her early 40s, with graying hair pulled into a bun and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Nathan at ease. "Hello, Emma," Dr. Green said softly, her voice soothing. "Would you like to draw something for me while I talk to Dr. Wells?" Emma didn't answer, but Nathan gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, she released his arm and walked over to the small table where a basket of crayons and paper was waiting. She sat down, still keeping one eye on Nathan, as if afraid he might disappear. Dr. Green turned her attention to Nathan. "Tell me about what you've observed," she said quietly, her tone professional but empathetic. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's made some progress, especially with her language skills. But she still doesn't talk much, and she has nightmares almost every night. Loud noises scare her, and she's very withdrawn around strangers." Dr. Green nodded thoughtfully. "Those are common symptoms in children who have experienced significant trauma. From what you've described, it sounds like Emma may have been displaced or experienced violence at a young age. Children who come from refugee camps or areas of conflict often show signs of PTSD, nightmares, hypervigilance, and a tendency to isolate themselves." The words hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He had suspected that Emma's past was difficult, but hearing it so plainly stated made it feel even more real. His mind raced with the possibilities. Had she been in a refugee camp? Was she a victim of human trafficking? The unknowns were overwhelming. "What can I do to help her?" Nathan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I want her to feel safe. I want her to trust me." Dr. Green smiled gently. "You're already doing the most important thing, Nathan. You're giving her stability, love, and patience. Those are the foundations of healing, but it's going to take time. Trauma like this can't be fixed overnight." She glanced over at Emma, who was quietly drawing at the table. "I would also recommend play therapy. It's a way for children to express their feelings and experiences without having to put them into words. It might help Emma open up in ways she's not ready to do verbally." Nathan nodded, taking it all in. "And school? Should I keep her enrolled?" "Yes," Dr. Green said firmly. "School is important, not just for her language development but for her socialization as well. Being around other children, learning routines, those are all crucial parts of her recovery. Just make sure her teachers are aware of her background so they can approach her with care." Nathan exhaled, feeling a sense of relief. He was doing the right thing. It wouldn't be easy, but he was committed to helping Emma heal, no matter how long it took. Over the next few weeks, Nathan took Dr. Green's advice to heart. He enrolled Emma in play therapy sessions with Dr. Green, and slowly, Emma began to make small breakthroughs. She still didn't speak much, but through her drawings and play, Nathan started to piece together fragments of her past. One afternoon, as Nathan and Emma walked through the local park, Emma's hand clasped tightly in his. She suddenly stopped in her tracks. She pointed to a playground in the distance, where children were running and laughing, their carefree voices filling the air. "Play?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan looked down at her, surprised. It was the first time she had expressed an interest in joining the other children. Up until now, she had been content to observe from a distance, too fearful to engage. "Of course," Nathan said, a smile spreading across his face. "You can play if you want to." Emma hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Nathan for reassurance. He nodded, giving her hand a gentle squeeze, and she slowly made her way toward the playground. Nathan followed at a safe distance, watching as she approached the swings. At first, Emma stood at the edge of the playground, her eyes wide as she watched the other children. But after a few minutes, she moved closer to the swings and tentatively climbed onto one. Nathan's heart swelled with pride as he watched her. It was a small step, but it was progress. As Emma swung back and forth, a little girl around her age ran over and introduced herself. Nathan couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw Emma smile, an expression that had been rare since she'd come into his life. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was there. For the rest of the afternoon, Emma played with the other children, her laughter mixing with theirs in the warm afternoon air. Nathan sat on a nearby bench, watching her with a mixture of pride and hope. She was healing, slowly but surely. Later that evening, as they sat together on the couch, Emma leaned against Nathan, her small body warm and relaxed. She was more comfortable around him now, her fear slowly giving way to trust. They sat in comfortable silence, the soft hum of the television in the background. "Nathan?" Emma said suddenly, her voice soft. Nathan turned to look at her, his heart skipping a beat. It was the first time she had said his name. "Yes, Emma." "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filled with sincerity. "For helping me." Nathan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gentle hug. "You don't have to thank me, Emma," he said softly. "I'm just glad you're here." Despite the progress Emma was making, there were still moments when the weight of her past pressed down on her, pulling her back into the darkness of her memories. Nathan saw it in the way she would suddenly grow quiet, her eyes distant, as if she were reliving something too painful to express. One evening, after dinner, Nathan noticed that Emma seemed more withdrawn than usual. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her drawing paper, her gaze fixed on something far away. "Emma?" Nathan asked gently, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" Emma didn't respond at first. Her small hands continued to fidget, and Nathan's heart sank as he realized she was retreating into herself again. He had seen this happen before, an invisible wall going up between them, separating her from the world around her. "Hey," Nathan said softly, placing a hand on hers. "You can talk to me, Emma. I'm here." Emma took a deep breath, her small body trembling. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his, her dark eyes filled with a sadness that made Nathan's heart ache. I want to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathan nodded, his pulse quickening. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the day when Emma would trust him enough to share her story. "You can tell me anything," Nathan said gently. "I'm listening." Emma swallowed hard, her hands still trembling. Before here, I lived in bad places. A place with lots of people. We didn't have food or a home." Nathan's breath caught in his throat as he realized what she was describing. It sounded like a refugee camp, crowded, dangerous, a place where children like Emma could easily get lost in the chaos. "I saw bad things," Emma continued, her voice shaky. People got hurt. People died." Her words hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He had known on some level that Emma had experienced trauma, but hearing it from her, hearing the pain in her voice, was almost more than he could bear. For a moment, Nathan was speechless, his mind racing with the horror of what Emma had endured. How could someone so young have seen so much? How could she carry the weight of that kind of pain? Nathan pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tightly as she began to cry softly into his chest. "Oh, Emma," he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." He held her for a long time, rocking her gently as her sobs slowly subsided. When she finally pulled back, her face tear-streaked and raw, Nathan wiped away her tears. "You're safe now," he said softly, looking into her eyes. "I promise, Emma. No one will hurt you again." Emma nodded, sniffling, and for the first time, Nathan saw something in her eyes that gave him hope, a flicker of trust, of belief that things could be different. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of closeness between Nathan and Emma. She still had moments of withdrawal, but she was opening up more and more each day, letting Nathan in little by little. It was a slow process, but Nathan was patient. He knew that healing took time, and he was committed to seeing it through. But just as Nathan began to feel like things were finally settling into a new normal, everything changed. One afternoon, as Nathan was picking Emma up from school, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Dr. Wells?" came the voice on the other end of the line. It was a woman, her tone professional but slightly hesitant. "Yes, this is Dr. Wells," Nathan replied, his heart beginning to pound. "Who's calling?" "This is Karen Marshall from Child Protective Services," the woman said. "I'm calling regarding Emma's case." Nathan's stomach dropped. His mind raced with possibilities. Had they found her family? Was someone coming to take her away? "What is it?" Nathan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "We've received new information," Karen said, her tone carefully measured. "We've located Emma's biological mother." Nathan's heart stopped. "Her name is Rachel Donovan," Karen continued. "She's been searching for Emma. She lost contact with her daughter during a period of homelessness and addiction, but she's recently entered a rehabilitation program and is seeking to reconnect with her daughter." Nathan felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. Emma's biological mother? Reconnect? "What does this mean?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you going to take Emma away?" Karen hesitated. "Not immediately. Rachel has expressed a desire to meet Emma, but this will need to be handled carefully. We're requesting a supervised meeting between Rachel and Emma in the coming weeks." Nathan's world tilted on its axis, just as Emma had started to heal, just as she had begun to trust him. Now this? "When will this meeting happen?" Nathan asked, his throat tight. "We're aiming for next week," Karen said. "We'll set up a safe, neutral location and both you and Rachel will be there." Nathan hung up the phone, his mind reeling. His worst fear was coming true, the possibility of losing Emma. And the thought of what that would do to her after everything they had been through together was almost unbearable. The following week passed in a blur for Nathan. He tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for Emma, but the looming meeting with her biological mother, Rachel Donovan, weighed heavily on his mind. Every time he looked at Emma, laughing as she worked on her homework or playing in the backyard, the dread in his chest grew. He knew this day would come, but he hadn't expected it so soon, hadn't prepared for the emotional chaos it would bring. On the morning of the meeting, Nathan woke early, his heart heavy with anxiety. He stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of oatmeal as his mind raced with what the day would bring. How would Emma react to seeing her mother again? Would she remember her? And if she did, would she want to go back to her? The thought twisted in Nathan's gut like a knife. He had grown so close to Emma over the past months. She was part of his life now, part of his heart. The idea of losing her, of watching her be taken away, was almost unbearable. Emma entered the kitchen, still sleepy-eyed and clutching her stuffed bear, which she had named Benny. Nathan forced a smile as she climbed onto the chair at the table. "Good morning, kiddo," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice light. "Morning," Emma murmured, rubbing her eyes. She yawned and looked up at Nathan. "What's for breakfast?" "Oatmeal with honey and blueberries," Nathan replied, setting the bowl in front of her. Emma loved blueberries, and Nathan wanted to give her something comforting before the emotional storm of the day hit. "How did you sleep?" "Okay," Emma said with a shrug, picking up her spoon, but Benny kept falling off the bed. Nathan chuckled softly, watching her eat. There was such innocence in the way she carried herself, a purity that made it hard to believe she had gone through so much pain. But today, that innocence would be tested. "Emma," Nathan began, his voice gentle. He had been struggling with how to explain the meeting to her, not wanting to overwhelm her with too much information. "Today, we're going to meet someone important. Her name is Rachel." Emma glanced up at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Rachel?" "Yes," Nathan said, sitting down beside her. "Rachel is your biological mother." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Nathan watched as Emma processed what he had just said, her small hands tightening around the spoon. "My mother?" she asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Nathan nodded, his heart aching at the confusion in her eyes. "Yes, she's been looking for you, and she wants to see you again. But I want you to know that no matter what happens today, I'm here for you. You're safe with me." Emma's eyes darted between Nathan and her bowl of oatmeal, her expression growing more troubled by the second. "Do I have to go with her?" The question hit Nathan like a blow to the chest. He had feared this moment, feared the possibility that Emma would have to choose between him and her biological mother. "No, Emma," Nathan said softly, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. We're just going to meet her today and talk. I'll be with you the whole time." Emma's lower lip trembled, and she clutched Benny tightly against her chest. "I don't remember her." Nathan's heart ached. He wished he could shield Emma from the emotional turmoil that was coming, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do was be there for her, to help her navigate the difficult road ahead. "It's okay," Nathan whispered, pulling her into a hug. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." The meeting took place in a small, neutral office space arranged by Child Protective Services. The room was sparse, with pale blue walls, a wooden table, and a few chairs. It was meant to be as non-threatening as possible, but the tension in the air was palpable as Nathan and Emma walked in, hand in hand. Rachel Donovan was already seated at the table when they arrived. Nathan's first impression of her was a mixture of sympathy and wariness. She was thin, her skin pale, and her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore a simple cardigan over a t-shirt, and her eyes, hollow and weary, held a glimmer of hope. But there was also fear there, a fear Nathan could relate to. She had a look at her, the kind that spoke of years of struggle, of battles fought and lost. When Rachel's eyes met Emma's, she froze. Her entire body seemed tense, as if the weight of seeing her daughter again after so long was too much to bear. Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with trembling hands. "Emma," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Oh, my baby girl." Emma clung tightly to Nathan's hand, her eyes wide and unsure as she looked at the woman sitting across from her. There was no spark of recognition, no memories resurfacing. For Emma, Rachel was just a stranger. Nathan knelt down beside Emma, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay," he whispered. "You can talk to her if you want." Emma hesitated for a long moment, her gaze darting between Nathan and Rachel. Finally, she took a small step forward, though her grip on Nathan's hand never loosened. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached out, but she didn't move any closer. It was as if she knew that forcing the moment would only make it harder. "I've missed you so much," Rachel said softly, her voice filled with longing. "I've thought about you every single day." Emma's face scrunched up in confusion, her small brow furrowed. "You're my first mommy?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sweetie. I'm your mommy." The air in the room felt thick with tension, as if the weight of the moment was pressing down on all of them. Emma didn't say anything, but she took another step forward, her gaze never leaving Rachel's tear-filled eyes. Nathan stayed by her side, ready to step in if Emma needed him. For the rest of the meeting, the conversation was awkward and stilted. Rachel spoke in halting sentences, trying to explain her absence in Emma's life, but it was clear that Emma didn't fully understand. How could she? She was just a child, caught in the middle of a situation far more complicated than she could comprehend. By the end of the visit, Emma had warmed slightly to Rachel, but the bond between them remained fragile. As they left the room, Rachel's parting words echoed in Nathan's mind. "Please," she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Take care of her. I know she's safe with you." In the days following the meeting, Nathan's world was filled with a mixture of relief and dread. The meeting had gone better than he had expected. Emma hadn't run away from Rachel, and there had been no emotional breakdowns. But that didn't mean the situation was resolved. Far from it. Nathan had barely begun to process what the meeting meant when he received a call from David Weston, his lawyer. David had been handling Emma's case since the beginning, helping Nathan navigate the complex legal process of temporary guardianship and potential adoption. But now, things were about to get a lot more complicated. "I won't sugarcoat this, Nathan," David said, his voice serious. "This situation is going to be tricky. Rachel's entered rehab. She's expressed a desire to reconnect with her daughter, and the court is generally inclined to favor reunification with biological parents when possible." Nathan's heart sank. He had feared this. "So what does that mean for me?" "It means that if Rachel continues to show progress in her rehabilitation and demonstrates that she can provide a stable home for Emma, there's a chance the court could grant her custody," David explained. "But it's not a done deal. You've provided Emma with stability, and we can argue that her best interests are served by staying with you. The court will have to weigh both sides carefully." Nathan's head spun as he tried to take it all in. He had been preparing himself for a legal battle, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. The thought of losing Emma, of watching her go back to a life of uncertainty, made his chest tighten with fear. "What can we do?" Nathan asked, his voice strained. "I can't let her go back to that. I won't." David's tone was calm but firm. "We'll continue documenting everything. Emma's progress, her bond with you, any concerns you have about Rachel's ability to provide a stable home. We'll need to show the court that Emma's best interests are with you." Nathan nodded, though a knot of anxiety had formed in his stomach. He had to trust David, but the thought of a long, drawn-out legal battle filled him with dread. He wasn't a lawyer, he was a doctor, and the idea of losing Emma to a system that didn't know her, didn't understand how much she had been through, was terrifying. But he had no choice. He had to fight for Emma. Over the next few weeks, life became a delicate balancing act for Nathan. He tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Emma, despite the emotional turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. She had sensed that something was wrong. Children always did. But Nathan did his best to reassure her, even as his own fears grew. One evening, after tucking Emma into bed, Nathan sat in his study, staring blankly at the papers spread out before him. Legal documents, court dates, evaluations. It were overwhelming. The fight for Emma's future was only just beginning, and Nathan knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. A soft knock on the door pulled Nathan from his thoughts. He looked up to see Emma standing in the doorway, clutching Benny to her chest. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Nathan?" she said softly, her voice trembling. "Are you mad at me?" The question took Nathan by surprise. He quickly stood and crossed the room, kneeling down to her level. "Mad at you? Of course not, Emma. Why would I be mad?" Emma bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Because of Rachel." Nathan's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, lifting her chin so that she looked him in the eye. "Emma, I'm not mad at you," Nathan said softly. "Not at all. You didn't do anything wrong. Rachel, she's part of your life, and that's okay. But no matter what happens, I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she threw her arms around Nathan's neck, clinging to him as if he were the only thing keeping her grounded. "I don't want to go with her," Emma whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I want to stay with you." Nathan closed his eyes, fighting back his own tears as he held her close. "You're not going anywhere, Emma," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to fight for you. I won't let you go." As he held her in his arms, Nathan felt a surge of determination. He didn't care how long the battle would take, or how hard it would be. Emma was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The day of the first court hearing arrived far too quickly for Nathan's liking. He sat in the courtroom, his hands clenched tightly in his lap as he listened to the lawyers argue over Emma's future. Rachel sat across from him, looking fragile but determined. Her lawyer presented her case with passion, emphasizing Rachel's commitment to her rehabilitation and her desire to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. David, Nathan's lawyer, countered with equal fervor. He spoke of Emma's progress under Nathan's care, her growing sense of stability, her emotional recovery, and the bond she had formed with Nathan. He argued that uprooting Emma now, just as she was beginning to heal, would be detrimental to her well-being. The judge, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, listened carefully to both sides. But when it came time to hear from Emma, Nathan's heart clenched with fear. The judge called Emma to the stand, and Nathan's stomach churned. He watched as Emma, looking so small and vulnerable, climbed into the witness chair. The court clerk handed her a teddy bear to hold, something to comfort her during the difficult moment. "Emma," the judge said gently, her voice softening, "can you tell me how you feel about living with Dr. Wells? And about your mother, Rachel?" Emma clutched the teddy bear tightly, her small fingers digging into the fabric as she looked around the room. Her eyes found Nathan's, and for a moment, she seemed to draw strength from his presence. I like living with Nathan," Emma said softly, her voice trembling. "He makes me feel safe." Nathan felt a lump rise in his throat. Tears pricked at his eyes as he listened to her speak. "And your mother?" the judge asked, her tone gentle but probing. Emma hesitated, her gaze flickering to Rachel. I don't remember much," she admitted quietly. But she was my mommy before." Rachel's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks as she listened to her daughter's words. The pain in the room was palpable, and Nathan's heart broke for both of them. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable as she considered the testimony. Finally, she spoke. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimony presented, it is clear that both parties love Emma deeply and want what is best for her, the judge said. However, given the progress Emma has made under Dr. Wells's care and the ongoing nature of Ms. Donovan's recovery, I find it in Emma's best interest to remain in the care of Dr. Wells for the time being, with supervised visitation rights for Ms. Donovan. Nathan exhaled, relief washing over him like a wave. But it was bittersweet relief. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Rachel had been granted visitation rights, and the possibility of her regaining full custody still loomed in the distance. As the judge dismissed the court, Rachel stood from her seat, her body trembling with emotion. She approached Nathan and Emma slowly, tears still streaming down her face. "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'm trying to be better for her. Please, just take care of her." Nathan nodded, his own voice caught in his throat. "I will," he said quietly. "I promise." The weeks that followed the court ruling were filled with a new kind of tension. Emma remained in Nathan's care, but the scheduled visitations with Rachel added a layer of complexity to their lives. Each visit was a delicate dance of emotions as Emma tried to reconcile her past with her present. At first, the visits were awkward. Emma didn't know how to talk to Rachel, and Rachel didn't want to overwhelm her daughter with too much too soon. But slowly, over time, they began to find a rhythm. Rachel was careful, patient, never pushing Emma beyond what she was comfortable with. Nathan attended each visitation, staying in the background but always nearby, ready to step in if Emma needed him. His protectiveness over her had only grown stronger since the court hearing, and though he sympathized with Rachel's struggles, he couldn't help but feel a fierce need to keep Emma safe. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet visit, Nathan and Emma walked home together in silence. Emma's hand was warm in his, her grip tight as they made their way through the neighborhood. "Nathan?" Emma asked softly, breaking the silence. "Yes, sweetheart," Nathan replied, glancing down at her. Emma's brow furrowed in thought, her gaze focused on the sidewalk ahead. "Why is everything so hard?" The question made Nathan's heart ache. He stopped walking and knelt down beside her, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "Life is hard sometimes," Nathan said softly, looking into her eyes. "But you're doing so well, Emma. You're so strong. And no matter what happens, I'm always going to be here for you. We'll get through this together." Emma nodded, though the sadness in her eyes didn't fully disappear. She leaned into Nathan, resting her head on his shoulder as he held her close. "I love you, Nathan," she whispered, her voice small and vulnerable. Nathan's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, Emma. Always." As they continued their walk home, hand in hand, Nathan felt a renewed sense of determination. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would fight for Emma, no matter what. She was his daughter in every way that mattered, and nothing would change that. As the months passed, life settled into a tense but steady rhythm. Nathan and Emma had developed a comfortable routine, while Rachel's supervised visits continued to be a delicate balancing act. Each meeting was fraught with emotion, with Rachel trying to reestablish her place in Emma's life without overwhelming her daughter, and Emma still struggling to reconcile her past with the new life she had built with Nathan. The scheduled visits, while peaceful on the surface, carried an underlying sense of fragility. Nathan could see how torn Rachel was. Her efforts to show stability and sobriety were evident in her physical appearance and demeanor. She had gained weight, her hair was healthier, and her eyes no longer carried the haunted, hollow look they once had. But Nathan could also see the pain etched deeply into her face. The knowledge that her daughter had begun to build a life with someone else, a life that didn't center around her. It wasn't long before the strain of these emotions led to a critical moment. One rainy afternoon, after another visit had ended, Rachel asked Nathan if they could meet privately without Emma. Her voice had been soft, almost pleading, and Nathan knew immediately that something weighed heavily on her. They arranged to meet at a local cafe, a quiet spot where they could talk. As Nathan sat at the table, sipping his coffee and waiting for Rachel to arrive, his mind buzzed with questions. What did she want to discuss? Was this another push for custody? Was she going to try to take Emma back now that she had completed rehab? The thought made his stomach churn with anxiety. When Rachel finally walked through the door, Nathan could see the weight of her decision written all over her face. She looked tired, as if she had spent sleepless nights thinking about what she was going to say. Her hands trembled as she sat down, and she avoided eye contact, fiddling nervously with her coffee cup. "Thank you for meeting me," Rachel said quietly, finally looking up. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and Nathan could tell this conversation was going to be difficult. "Of course," Nathan replied gently, leaning forward. "What's on your mind?" Rachel swallowed hard, her fingers still nervously tracing the rim of her cup. She hesitated for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about Emma," Rachel began, her voice shaking. "About what's best for her. And for me." Nathan said nothing, waiting for her to continue. His heart pounded in his chest, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I love Emma more than anything," Rachel continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I know that I've missed so much of her life. I missed so much of her growing up, and now I see how happy she is with you, how safe she feels." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? He stayed silent, letting Rachel speak. "I've tried to get better," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "I've worked so hard in rehab, and I've been doing everything I can to be the mother she deserves. But I've realized something." Her eyes met Nathan's then, filled with a sorrow so deep it nearly broke him. "I can't give her what she needs, not right now, maybe not ever, and that's the hardest thing I've ever had to admit." Nathan's heart ached for her. He could see the pain in every word she spoke, the weight of her realization hanging over her like a storm cloud. This wasn't a simple decision. This was a mother coming to terms with the fact that her child was better off with someone else. "I've been thinking," Rachel continued, her voice trembling, "about what's best for Emma, and I think it's time for me to step back." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. "I want you to adopt her, permanently." Nathan froze. He had imagined this moment 100 times in his head, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. Rachel was giving him her blessing to adopt Emma, to become her father in every legal and emotional sense. But it wasn't just that. Rachel was giving up her right to be the primary parent in Emma's life. She was choosing what was best for her daughter, even though it meant stepping aside. "Rachel," Nathan began, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not abandoning her," Rachel said quickly, as if trying to justify her decision. "I'll always be her mother. I'll always be here for her. But I've come to realize that you can give her what I can't. You can give her stability, a home, a life that's not filled with uncertainty." Nathan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He could barely speak, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. "Thank you," he finally whispered, his voice shaking. "Thank you for trusting me with her." Rachel nodded, her lips trembling. "I know you'll take care of her," she said softly. "I've seen how she looks at you. She loves you, Nathan. You're her father in every way that matters." Nathan felt his heart swell with emotion. This was the ultimate sacrifice. Rachel was choosing her daughter's happiness over her own desire to be her mother. It was an act of pure, selfless love. "I promise," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll take care of her. I'll love her with everything I have." Rachel smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I know you will." The process of adopting Emma wasn't easy. It was long, complicated, and filled with more paperwork than Nathan had ever imagined. But it was worth every moment. As the months passed, the bond between Nathan and Emma only grew stronger. They had become a family in every way, with Emma blossoming under the stability and love that Nathan provided. Rachel remained a part of Emma's life, though their visits became less frequent. It wasn't out of neglect or disinterest, but rather a mutual understanding that Emma was thriving in her new life. Rachel had made peace with her decision, and she focused on continuing her recovery, knowing that she had done the right thing for her daughter. One bright autumn day, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The adoption was finalized in court, making Nathan Emma's legal father. The moment was filled with emotion as Nathan stood in the courtroom with Emma beside him, holding his hand. She looked up at him with wide, excited eyes, unaware of the legal significance of the day but understanding in her own way that something important was happening. "Is it done?" Emma asked, her voice filled with curiosity as they walked out of the courthouse together. Nathan knelt down beside her, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, Emma, it's done. I'm officially your dad now." Emma's face lit up with joy, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Really?" "Really," Nathan said, pulling her into a hug. "Forever and ever." Emma hugged him tightly, and Nathan felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He had fought for this moment, and now it was finally real. Emma was his daughter, and he would protect her, love her, and guide her through life just as he had promised. "Can we celebrate?" Emma asked, pulling back from the hug with a mischievous grin. "Can we get ice cream?" Nathan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Of course, we'll get all the ice cream you want." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, eating ice cream, laughing, and enjoying the warmth of the sun. For the first time in a long time, Nathan felt like everything had fallen into place. The weight of his grief over Sarah's death had eased, replaced by the joy of building a new life with Emma. That evening, as they sat on the couch together, Emma curled up in Nathan's lap, her head resting against his chest. She was sleepy, her eyes half closed, but she still held on to him tightly, as if she didn't want to let go. "Nathan?" Emma murmured sleepily. "Yeah, sweetheart?" Nathan replied, stroking her hair gently. "Can I call you Dad now?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with innocence. Nathan's heart swelled with emotion. He had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, it felt like everything had come full circle. "Of course you can," Nathan whispered, his voice thick with love. "I'd love that." Emma smiled, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep in his arms. Nathan sat there for a long time, holding her close, his heart filled with a deep sense of gratitude. He had lost so much in his life, Sarah, the dream of the family they had planned, but life had given him a second chance. And now, he had everything he had ever wanted. The seasons changed, and as the first signs of winter began to appear, Nathan decided to throw a small celebration in honor of Emma's adoption. He wanted to commemorate the day with the people who had supported them through the process, including Rachel, who had been instrumental in helping Nathan understand what it meant to be Emma's father. The party was simple, just a few close friends, some balloons, and a cake that Emma had helped bake. The house was filled with laughter, the warmth of family and friends enveloping them as they celebrated Emma's new beginning. Rachel arrived a little late, her face glowing with happiness as she walked through the door. Nathan could see the pride in her eyes as she watched Emma run around the room, playing with her friends. There was no sadness there, only peace. Rachel had found her place in Emma's life, not as the primary caregiver, but as someone who would always be there to love and support her daughter. Nathan and Rachel exchanged a knowing glance from across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had been on together. They had both fought for Emma in their own ways, and now they were united in the love they had for her. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Emma climbed onto Nathan's lap, her face glowing with happiness. "Did you have fun today?" Nathan asked, kissing the top of her head. Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it was the best day ever," Nathan chuckled, feeling his heart swell with love. "I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart. You deserve it." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with contentment. "We're a family now, right?" You, me, and Mama Rachel? Nathan smiled, his heart filled with pride and joy. That's right, Emma. We're a family. Emma grinned, resting her head against his chest once more. I love you, Dad. Nathan held her close, his eyes misting with emotion. I love you too, Emma. Always. As they sat together in the quiet of their home, Nathan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The road to get here had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been filled with love, hope, and second chances. And now, as he looked at the little girl who had come into his life and changed everything, he knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. They were a family built on love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that no matter how difficult the road may be, there is always hope for a new beginning. As the years passed, the bond between Nathan and Emma grew even stronger. She thrived in school, excelling in her studies and making friends. Her laughter filled their home with warmth, and her bright, curious nature brought joy to everyone around her. Rachel continued her visits, always a loving presence in Emma's life. She had rebuilt her own life, working hard to stay sober and finding stability for herself. She had accepted that Emma's home was with Nathan, and their relationship had grown into one of mutual respect and understanding. Nathan often thought about Sarah and the life they had planned together. He knew she would have loved Emma, would have been proud of the family he had built. In a way, he felt that Sarah's presence was still with him, guiding him through the challenges of fatherhood and helping him find the strength to be the father Emma needed. One summer evening, as Nathan and Emma sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the horizon, Emma turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah, sweetheart," Nathan replied, looking down at her with a smile. "Do you think Mama Sarah would be proud of us?" The question caught Nathan off guard, and for a moment he was speechless. He hadn't expected Emma to ask about Sarah, but the fact that she had warmed his heart. "I think she'd be very proud," Nathan said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "She would love you so much, Emma." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "I think so too." Nathan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they watched the last rays of sunlight fade into the night. They sat in comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Nathan knew one thing for certain. They would face them together, as a family. And with that, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. If you were moved by Nathan and Emma's heartwarming journey and want to hear more stories that touch your soul, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on more stories of love, family, and resilience. And if this story inspired you, please like and share with others who need a little hope in their lives. Thanks for watching.